Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. President Joe Biden unveiled his new plan to tackle rising violent crime in America yesterday. Of course, it entails going after firearms and so-called rogue gun dealers, as if that's the reason for the explosion in crime, not the demands to defund the police and the utter breakdown of police morale coming from his own party. In any case, if you watched it yesterday, you can be forgiven if you were a little confused, because the president himself seemed a little confused, especially foggy, losing his train of thought over and over. But perhaps his foggiest moments came when he was talking about the Second Amendment. He said some pretty provocative things yesterday that were somewhat alarming, not because we're afraid of President Biden per se, but because it demonstrates the lack of understanding at all whatsoever of the Second Amendment on the part of the Democrat Party. So let's roll that clip of what President Biden had to say about the Second Amendment and why Americans don't need to own certain firearms.
The Second Amendment, from the day it was passed, limited the type of people who could own a gun and what type of weapon you could own. You couldn't buy a cannon. Those who say the blood of patriots, and all the stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government. Well, the tree of liberty is not water with the blood of patriots. What's happened is that there never been, if you want to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons. The point is that there's always been the ability to rationally limit the type of weapon that can be owned and who can own it.
Yeah, well, First off, no, there are, not to my knowledge nor any other historian's knowledge out there at all whatsoever, has there ever been any kind of ban on any kind of firearms that anyone has ever been able to own in the colonies. In fact, my first two books, I actually delved into this, and the only kind of law that actually existed during the time of the colonies was that on a frighting, and that covered unusual and not at all commonly owned weapons, something like, I think it was what Antonin Scalia had written in his opinion in Heller, like a head axe or something of that nature. So a frighting or a modern day brandishing with malicious intent, that was something that different colonies covered. But no, and also cannons, yes, you could absolutely privately own a cannon. In fact, on the road from Boston to Lexington and Concord, when the British were on the march to have the first the first gun confiscation in United States history, before it was really the United States, but you get the idea. There were rumors that there was one of the colonists who was a friend to the Minutemen, one of the many militias that were formed up in response to British tyranny, that had a cannon. Some farmer had a cannon in his barn, and they were going to go seize that and firearms and munitions. So nothing that he said there at all whatsoever was accurate, and it's interesting how he omitted the tyranny part of that. But it was a very muddled statement, and there was one thing that Biden said that demonstrates a very, very confused understanding about the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms in America. Biden said that if you wanted to take on the government, you'd need F-15s and nukes. Now, that's some pretty alarming language from the president, although, I could be very graceful and extend to him the courtesy that I'm never afforded, and that we don't really think he was being literal in suggesting that the government would use those weapons on its own citizenry. I don't know. Eric Swalwell said it before. We're not quite sure. We've seen it. But remember, by the way, speaking of Democrat Eric Swalwell, do you remember when he said this responding to a tweet? He said, quote, "And it would be a short war, my friend. The government has nukes, too many of them, but they're legit. I'm sure if we talked, we could find common ground to protect our families and our communities," end quote. Now, Eric Swalwell ought to be a little bit more careful with rhetoric like that, and also with the passage of gas on MSNBC, but I digress. He is also demonstrating this old Democrat fallacy that's always pulled out when discussing the right to bear arms, which is this: what do you think your little AR-15 is going to do against our military weapons anyway? So in other words, their logic, if the government were to decide to fight American citizens, what chance would those citizens have? See, the government has nukes and tanks and SEAL teams, etc., so why even bother owning that gun? So we want to take this fallacy on now and talk about the importance of the Second Amendment and why our founders believed that it was essential. The foremost reason that our founders believed in the citizens' right to bear arms was to put a check on government power. Not another government's power, to be clear, our own government's power. Now, why is that? Because the founders understood that absolute power in the hands of government always leads to tyranny over its citizens. Also think about this. These were people who were coming from a tyrannical leader And going all the way back to Magna Carta and the recognition of firearms in the hands of citizenry, these were people who wanted to make sure that they could provide a healthy respect and check on their own government. Think about this. The greatest slaughter of human beings in history has been carried out by governments against their own people. Just look at the 20th century. Just look at Joseph Stalin, the communist dictator of the Soviet Union, killed an estimated 30 to 40 million of his own people through his tyrannical policies. It's estimated that Mao Zedong of the Chinese Communist Party killed about 65 million Chinese by execution, imprisonment, or starvation. Think about the killing fields. Cambodia, Pol Pot, dictator, another communist government, killed about 2 million of his own people in his bloody Year Zero campaign. And how much more do you want to go? How about Hitler, Nazi Germany, who attempted the final solution with the plan to eradicate all Jewish people from the earth? He started with German Jews, to be clear, citizens of Germany, and he nearly succeeded. He killed 7 out of 10 Jews in Europe. It was a mass genocide. These monsters of government tyranny are just from the last century. And combined, now think about this, combined, they killed over 100 million of their own citizens. The 20th century gave us a really, really close and personal lesson into what government tyranny looks like. It's a bloodbath. And this slaughter of their very own citizens was always done in the name of public safety and protection and on behalf of the supposed good of the people. And our founders understood that a government with absolute power always leads to the same place, tyranny. They saw it firsthand with British rule over the colonies. In fact, it was a Jefferson quote that I actually included in, I think it was my radio prep today, where Jefferson said anyone that has a little bit of power in government, you should probably, and I'm abridging this, you should just trust that, have a little distrust of that person. Tyranny can't happen in America today. Did you notice how quickly our constitutional rights were curtailed when a virus about as dangerous as, honestly, depending on what your comorbidities were, you can't really trust what anyone was saying about how dangerous it was. But seriously, the survival rate was 99%. Spread through America, suddenly you saw governors telling people that they couldn't even go to church. And some of these were Republican governors, by the way. People were put into lockdown, gags thrown over faces. We have a governor of Texas who's a Republican, and on his order, there were people who were arrested and jailed for violating the freedom to move, basically. But it was all for our protection, right? Oh, you disagree? Well, don't do what we say and we'll have you arrested. That's still happening now all over the world in Western governments like Canada. Tyranny can happen here too. Our founders understood that. Our founders were actually quite brilliant. They understood the corruption that exists in every human heart. That's why they talk so much about virtue. Give the government too much power and they will always misuse it. They always do. So let's go back to that argument that Biden was making here, which was this. What is the point of owning an AR-15, which, by the way, is one of the most commonly used semi-automatic rifles that is responsible for the least amount of homicides, according to every single FBI uniform crime report from the time that those crime reports were generated by the FBI up until the latest numbers released in 2019. If the government comes for you with nukes and F-15s, what's that AR-15 going to do for you? Now, here's Biden making this silly argument again back in February. Watch.
No, and by the way, those who say the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots, a great line. Well, guess what? The fact is, if you're going to take on the government, you need an F-15 with Hellfire missiles. There's no way an AK-47 is going to take care of you if you're going to take on, you're worried about the government coming down, knocking down your door.
I have to add here, think about the time of the colonists when the Minutemen and everyone all these colonists took on the greatest military in the world. It's been done before. Biden clearly likes to make this argument for why you don't need guns, as do all Democrats. But here's the answer to this. The AR-15 and other legally owned firearms possessed by hundreds of millions of Americans makes a war against American citizens untenable and unthinkable. And if you don't believe it, think about our protracted wars in Afghanistan and Vietnam. All of our American military might, all of our technology, all of our advances and advantages could not fully subdue an armed populace that was determined to push back, although it was on behalf of communists. They didn't have nukes and F-15s either. And not just us. Ask the Russians about Afghanistan. After decades, they pulled out, too, all the modern military weaponry of the Soviet Union couldn't overcome the guerrilla warfare that was directed at them by local militias. The point is this: the Second Amendment is a powerful, powerful dissuader to government tyranny. The American government isn't going to nuke its own citizenry. I mean, would they? They wouldn't have a country to govern if they did. The government isn't likely to use fighter jets against its own people either. By the way, all of this presupposes that our troops will go along with it. Imagine the optics of that. It would make Tiananmen Square look like child's play. And that's the brilliance of the Second Amendment. An armed populace deters any such tyrannical actions like this to begin with. It's just simply not rational to go house by house with what, magic? If you're against guns, oh, you're going to use guns to disarm American citizens. And it would be a disaster, a lose-lose for everyone. Now, I'm not saying that a motivated government couldn't do that. I'm just saying that they won't ever likely consider doing it because hundreds of millions of Americans are armed, and I promise you it would get real ugly real fast. The simple truth is this: the Second Amendment reminds our government that we are not subjects. We're supposed to have a healthy respect here. We the people, we are the ones who run this country. We are the boss. The government works for us. Remember? That's the American idea. It's the most daring idea ever put forward in the history of the world. This idea that a free people can actually govern ourselves. And has it worked? We've got our problems, but find one better. We're the most powerful empire that's ever existed on this planet. We're the only richest country. I mean, with the advances and the health of our people, we're the only most free human beings who've ever lived on Earth. Our civil liberties, our protections against government tyranny, really are the envy of the world, and really it's what's under the bed of tyrants at night. That's why people flood into America seeking refuge from government corruption and tyranny. The Second Amendment is insurance against that. It's because they never wanted the government to go to war against its own people. That's why our founders enshrined this right and this acknowledged natural right in the Constitution. I mean, do you think it's a coincidence that we have so much individual liberty in America? It's just because the government felt like empowering people? No, it's because from the beginning, an armed populace was a constant reminder to the government that we're not subjects. We pay the bills, right? We pay the cost to be the boss. And the government only governs by the consent of the people and exists to protect people's liberty. End of story. And that's America, and it is the most beautiful, counterintuitive idea for a nation ever conceived. And so that's why, if you want the full quote, Jefferson said, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time by the blood of patriots and tyrants." By the way, the full thing, quote, down here, he says, "And what country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. The remedy is to set them right as to facts, pardon, and pacify them. What signify a few lives lost in a century or two? The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure." End quote. Now, Jefferson was saying that the government must be checked by the power of an armed populace, a healthy respect going both ways to avoid inevitably falling into tyranny. See, free will and a compromised people and an absence of virtue can do that. Now, he was suggesting that if a free people, if they were to preserve their freedom, history shows that you gotta be willing to bleed for it from time to time. Freedom is precious. You gotta be willing to make the hard decisions and volunteer and undertake thankless work to make it happen also. Now, as we're discovering today, once again, as our free speech is threatened and our current government seems intent on limiting our rights to be able to defend ourselves and our loved ones while wanting to defund the police, an armed citizenry protects individual freedom and helps stop government tyranny before it ever starts. Now, finally, I mentioned Hitler and Nazi Germany, who slaughtered 6 million Jewish people. Before the Holocaust, guess what Germany's government did? They disarmed German citizenry, German Jews, starting in 1933. And it was based on the reason of public safety. Sound familiar? They couldn't let Jewish people have guns because that would be unsafe. Why disarm German Jews if those guns were no match for the powerful German military? Because naturally, it would make the Holocaust much easier to carry out if the Jews were disarmed. And Hitler knew that, so he confiscated Jewish citizens' guns. And before the rise of the Nazi government, Germany's Weimar Republic was a quote-unquote democracy, a reminder that government tyranny can happen anywhere. And our founders knew that we must be vigilant to protect freedom and liberty, even here in the United States of America, especially in America, the last truly free country on earth. That's why we need and we must protect our Second Amendment natural rights. Because if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? It's that healthy respect that goes both ways, a healthy fear of the populace and the recognition by our government officials that the only reason they're even in these offices in the first place is by consent of our vote. Up next, Representative Claudia Tenney of New York is taking on the case for concealed carry to the Supreme Court. We'll also discuss H.R. 1, H.R. 4, which are kind of the same thing, and the Democrats' desire to federalize apparently all election laws. But we'll keep it here, we got a lot. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company that serves premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer, he's been over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces. I've heard some stories too. Some of them are real good. And also as a CIA contractor. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's mission of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. Now this summer, Black Rifle Coffee Company wants you to enjoy your coffee. Drink it up, whether you just, you're brewing it and getting ready to tackle the day, cracking open a can of 300 on your next backcountry mission or just to get through, a summer day with your kids at home. Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way wherever the summer takes you. So head on over to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to order yours and use code DanaTV at checkout because you'll get 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. So fuel your summer with America's coffee, Black Rifle Coffee. Well, we were talking quite a bit about the Second Amendment. Representative Claudia Tenney of New York joins us now. She believes that concealed carry should be a right afforded to all New Yorkers, and she's taking the case to the Supreme Court. We'll also talk a little bit about H.R. 1 and then H.R. 4, now that H.R. 1 doesn't look like it's going to go through, and Democrats' plan to keep pushing for the nationalization of all elections. Congresswoman, welcome. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. It's great to be on.
I have to immediately, though, get your thoughts on that now infamous soundbite that's been circulating the airwaves. President Joe Biden, I know he was being facetious, but still, after hearing him say it several times on the campaign trail and after hearing Congressman Eric Swalwell say it before, I really do get an understanding of their non-understanding of the Second Amendment, talking about, well, you don't need your AR-15s or any commonly owned semi-automatic rifles because we have nukes and jets. But if they're so inconsequential, then why even ban them, Congresswoman?
That was that, and then if you're if you really want to take on your government, you need an F-15 and nuclear weapons. So he's encouraging us to do that. It's absurd. But there was another thing that caught my ear because I come from New York, where we have Governor Cuomo, who passed sweeping anti-gun legislation in 2013. It was called the SAFE Act, which I lobbied against for many years when I was a member of the state assembly. But he gave up and famously said in one of his State of the State addresses, it doesn't take 10 bullets to kill a deer. And when I heard Joe Biden say, look, you don't need a high capacity magazine to kill a deer, they're not wearing Kevlar vests. And again, they think that the Second Amendment is about hunting. They don't understand that the Bill of Rights are a set of rights to protect us from government as a self-governing constitutional republic. So again, they don't understand the Second Amendment or any of the other amendments, I think, for that matter.
No, that's right. We're not worried about deer breaking into our houses in the middle of the night or, deer trying to be all tyrannical against us. That would be a great sci-fi film, but that's not what's happening in reality. Now, to this extent, you mentioned you're pressing back against the SAFE Act, which is insane legislation. But, of course, also, then there's this New York Rifle Pistol Association case. This has been kind of going back and forth. New York has been in the headlines a lot lately as it relates to 2A law. And I know that there's the amicus brief that's going to be filed with the Supreme Court because this is yet another case that's going to be coming up to the top court in the land. Tell us a little bit about this because I really feel for New Yorkers. They've just have really been run through the ringer, and it seems like every single year there's a new law telling them what they can't do and what they can't leave their house with.
Yeah, this is a really important case, and we're really glad that the Supreme Court is going to weigh in on this. It's a case out of Rensselaer County where there's a judge who's been typically denying concealed carry permits to residents people with perfectly clean records, clean background checks, and doing that just because, his theory is that you don't need to carry concealed for self-defense outside of your home. And so he's been denying permits routinely. And this case was taken on by the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. And, not surprisingly, they lost on the Second Circuit in New York City. And thankfully, they've moved on to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is going to take this case and weigh in. I'm really honored that NRA asked me to lead this brief in defense of our Second Amendment rights, and especially our concealed carry rights. This is not just happening in Rensselaer County. It's happening all over our state, where people who are being denied the ability to conceal carry outside their homes, by arbitrary standards set by, some judge or whoever, a pistol officer, in a county municipality. So this case actually centers around that standard, and we want to clarify in this amicus brief for NRA, that this is a right, and it is not just a privilege to carry a gun. It's a fundamental right, and that's basically the argument that they're making in this brief.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking how many shall issue, may issue. I mean, the difference between, and I keep hearing all of this from a lot of listeners from our affiliates in California, some of our affiliates up in New York as well. Well, you may have the right to be able to carry something outside of your home and be able to conceal carry. California was, I think it was the Santa Barbara sheriff that was getting in a lot of trouble up there, because it was something similar a few years ago where they were it was very arbitrary in the way that permits were issued, and so few were issued. Is the same kind of approach in New York? Are they demanding that you demonstrate some sort of good excuse to be able to conceal carry a firearm, as has been done in other of these may issue areas?
Yeah, basically for most of these counties that are, especially Rensselaer County, my own home county of Oneida County in central New York, they're basically saying if you don't have a self-defense reason, or you're not the victim of death threats, which I have been as a member of Congress and also as a member of the State Assembly, then you don't need the right to conceal carry. You're going to be restricted, meaning you're only going to be able to carry in your home, which is, a complete violation of the Second Amendment rights. And, it's interesting because there is the standard that is being applied. They're trying to add some kind of scrutiny to it. So I don't want to get too much into the legalese, but our argument is this: the right to carry is for everyone, all Americans. And we think in some ways, they're basing it on the old Sullivan case, which was really a race-based standard. And we think that everyone should have the right, and it shouldn't be a race-based standard. And that, that Sullivan case applied to, minority communities and people who didn't have status, and that it was actually created to protect elites. And why we think that this is why the court's taking the case. They're going to clarify it. They're going to come off of Heller and say that we really don't need any kind of intermediate scrutiny to analyze a fundamental right. This is a right, simple enough under the Constitution. We don't need to have clarification or balancing interests with the government, because guess what happens when you balance interests with the government? The government always wins. And the government shouldn't be winning, especially dealing with a fundamental right when we're talking about the Bill of Rights, which was specifically given to us by our founders because they were trying to protect us in the event of a tyrannical government. Interesting to note also in New York State, New York was the 11th state out of 13 to join with the Constitution under, back in 1788, eventually 1789, because they demanded that the Bill of Rights be put in place and added to the Constitution to protect our rights. So it's interesting that we've gone a long way from our constitutionality, with the governing body that we have now, one-party democratic rule in Albany. But as a state and as original colony, we really stood for our rights right from day one.
That's absolutely true. Talking with Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, it's amazing how diversity is applied in almost every single issue and aspect of American life, except going on, because I was reading just a little bit of the draft of the brief, except where it concerns this Sullivan law in New York with this particular case. On this point, and there's a number of things that I wanted to ask you about, including HR 1 and getting into the John Lewis Act as well. I wanted to get your response. One last thing on 2A issues. Part of the president's push yesterday, when I know it was a speech on reducing crime, but it was more of a gun control speech. But he wants to use coronavirus relief funds, taxpayer dollars, in the American Rescue Plan, and send it to majority, actually I think all of them on his list were Democrat-run cities and historically Democrat-run cities where they have a high recidivism rate. I have tons of stories, I was talking about these on radio today, where you have judges in these cities and prosecutors in these cities that either just throw out felony gun charges or drop them, reduce them, etc., or they don't even don't prosecute them at all whatsoever. Eddie Johnson, former superintendent of Chicago PD, said it was the same 1,400 people that are driving the majority of Chicago's crime. Chicago's on that list. This sounds like a blue city bailout more so than any kind of effort to actually reduce crime and using coronavirus relief funds. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're exactly right on that, because right now these are the cities that have been defunding the police and realizing they're getting the backlash of high crime rates, and their taxpayers are clapping back at them and saying, look, we need better policing, we need more police. Taking our police off the streets is not the answer. And another thing that is really important is prosecutors tend to drop illegal gun charges. You know, most of the crimes committed in New York City, which has huge high crime rates and shootings, are committed by people with illegal guns. And the Democrats never seem to understand, or I shouldn't say Democrats, I should say anti-Second Amendment people tend to not understand that no one wants more gun rights to be protected than the people who actually carry guns legally. So we don't want people that are going to be criminals carrying guns around. But, you know, restricting the rights of legal gun owners is not going to reduce crime. And I'm really concerned about taking that money from the taxpayers out of the very over-bloated American Rescue Act. Why don't we just give that money back to the taxpayers? Or why don't we help our police officers lower the crime rates and work on prosecuting the people who are carrying illegal guns throughout our cities?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the big question. And that coronavirus relief money apparently is also being promoted as part of how they're going to cover what's being proposed in this infrastructure bill that the president announced today. It seems like that coronavirus relief money is going for everything but coronavirus relief.
Well, that's the case. You know, they'd like to get more money than they really need, because so much of what they're trying to do is really to enshrine one-party rule forever. And whether it's, you know, to fund their voting rights, and we're going to get into that next. But also, you know, the coronavirus, a lot of this COVID relief really didn't go towards helping truly targeted relief for people. And it went toward the Green New Deal and all kinds of other Democrat bailouts. I mean, we gave $12.6 million to New York State alone, and New York passed its largest budget in history, and we raised taxes by $4 billion after Senator Schumer said, oh, we're not going to need to raise taxes because we're getting $12.6 billion from the federal government under the American Rescue Act. But lo and behold, we raised taxes by $4 billion. And, you know, it's like they just can't stop spending. And we had the largest budget in history. Most of it was a payoff that Andrew Cuomo wanted to make sure that nobody brought an impeachment article to the floor against him, or numerous impeachment articles. And also to make sure that he removed as governor. So he basically paid off all the legislators. You know, in a way, it was almost, it was a pay to play
off with taxpayer dollars.
Yes.
You mentioned Congresswoman voting as well. H.R. 1 looks like it's been defeated. And for those who may not know all the details of H.R. 1, I think it was one, I was talking to my friend Jay Christian Adams just the other day. I think it's one of the worst pieces of legislation that's been proposed, maybe perhaps in our lifetimes, federalizing all elections, circumventing the Constitution and removing that right to do so from the states, cementing mail-in ballots as the way to vote, no photo ID, and then, of course, putting the public on the hook for financing at least a portion of these campaigns. And then going after free speech, trying to go through the FEC to do that. This was a nightmare. Now, it fell apart in the Senate. I tend to think that it's going to come back piecemeal style in some way or form. But now it's almost as if, well, if you support the John Lewis Act, they're trying to act as though the John Lewis Act is a compromise, H.R. 4, that's somehow a compromise for not getting H.R. 1. But Congresswoman, I mean, tell everybody, it seems like the same bad stuff is still in this one.
Yeah, this is terrible. I was so disappointed that Joe Manchin, Senator Manchin, I'm not voting for H.R. 1. I don't support it. I don't support it, on and on and on. And what does he do? He votes for the procedural vote to get it to the floor, which people say, oh, that was just a procedural vote. And I said, well, without the procedural vote, you can't get to the substance of the bill. So it's essentially a vote for H.R. 1, which is a disaster. Right. And it's, we know we can't trust him now. I worry about what he's going to do with the filibuster, even though he wrote an op-ed and Senator Kirsten Sinema wrote an op-ed. I'm worried about that. But H.R. 4, as I'm sure you've talked with Christian Adams who's phenomenal on this issue. He does a great job. He's actually helped us and given us advice throughout my odyssey in getting elected and going through the count that we had that was over 100 days. I didn't even get sworn in until February 11th. But H.R. 4 is dangerous as well because it also federalizes elections, and it requires a pre-clearance of any laws that a state might pass to, embolden or strengthen voter ID laws or to minimize the ability to cheat. We want to make sure that people, we want as many people to vote, but we just don't want it easy to cheat. And so it would actually put that, and not only would it go federalize it, it would put it through the DOJ. So the Department of Justice would be a super police officer going around and telling the states what they can and cannot pass, all the way down to whether they wanted, a voting district in a state might want to put up a new voting district. They might want to put out a poll location. That would be required to be run through the Department of Justice and the federal government, weighed in by, the Democrat partisans in charge right now. And that's really dangerous and that's really scary. And the worst thing about it, this actual provision of the former Voting Rights Act was struck down in a case in 2013 by Shelby versus Holder. And yes, it is the former Attorney General Holder. And so now we're going to be unearthing this and now giving the Democrats even more power, weaponizing the DOJ. And that's the last thing we need to do now in light of what's been going on with the Department of Justice. Other issue.
Yeah, exactly. That's the last thing that they need to be expanded. That's what it seems like. Expand the ATF, expand the IRS, expand the DOJ, make them all superpowers. Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, we really appreciate your work on behalf of the Second Amendment and also to protect the integrity of the vote. Would love to have you back again soon. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you so much. It's great. It's an honor beyond. We appreciate all your advocacy on all these issues.
Of course. Thank you so much. All right, folks, up next, critical race theory continues the march through America's schools. But another lawmaker, Congressman Glenn Grothman, has introduced a bill that bans CRT in D.C. public schools. That's going to be a slap-down knockout fight. He's going to join us next to tell us about it. Congressman Glenn Grothman from the beautiful state of Wisconsin, best cheese curds on God's green earth. He joins us now to talk about the scourge of critical race theory in our schools. Now, he's introduced a bill called the Ending the Critical Race Theory in D.C. Public Schools Act, and he's here to tell us about it. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, right. As Republicans, we don't like to prescribe curriculum all over the country, but we do have control of the District of Columbia. I think it would be a good place to start. This critical race theory is a cancer on the country. We are teaching young people that America is a racist country, and it's so preposterous, right? All you have to do is look around and see so many people from all around the world. In my district, we have a lot of Hmong, for example, came here. The fact that they're not European, they hit the ground running, learn English, off they go. But we're teaching some of our young people that why even get going in life? America is so racist. We had an example in my district where a teacher was teaching the kids that the reason they were being arrested is the local police department was racist. Just horrible.
Yeah, it's Congressman. It's not academia. It's not educational. It is masquerading as those things, though. And what do you make of the criticisms from people? I watched, for instance, a friend of ours, and I'm sure you're familiar with him, Christopher Rufo, who finally was invited to go and speak with Joy Reid on this issue. And she's, characterized him as being this anti-educational Republican operative. But, he was setting her straight with us. But they say, well, what you're describing isn't actually critical race theory. That's not what I know. I've been writing about Derek Bell and critical race theory and its founding in Harvard, et cetera, since 2011, 2012. But it's insane that this is being excused as not being such. And I think we saw this with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, earlier when he was questioned by Tom Cotton. What do you say to those individuals who keep insisting that this theory is not at all what it actually is?
Well, obviously it is. What country tells its people that racism is the source of everything? If I can't get a loan, if I wind up in jail, if I don't have the job I like, it must be because of racism. Or if you have a friend who is successful, it must be because of racism. I mean, it's so preposterous, so obviously preposterous, in part because you look at all the immigrants who come here and succeed, and you look at what is being said by the teachers in these schools or in the classes that they give, even in the military. I think the effect has to be to destroy self-confidence in America and say, you know, why do I keep defending it?
Yeah, that's a really great point, because that's ultimately what it's that Frankfurt School Marxism. It's an offshoot of critical theory that teaches that the United States is so flawed as a republic it has to be rebuilt. That's not true.
Right, that's exactly what it is. There's a constant war in this country, they claim, between race. There's a fixed amount of goods in this country, and what you get, the size of your house, the quality of your Medicare, whatever, is determined by your race. And there's nothing you do to escape it. And if you don't like where you're working, the only way to escape it is overthrow the government. We need to start from scratch. And that's what they're working towards.
Now, I'm so interested in what kind of pushback you've received so far from DC schools, because this is like from the frying pan right into the fire pit right here. This, I can't even imagine.
Well, it's a huge problem in the District of Columbia. And, you know, I think Donald Trump got like 5% of the vote, which is almost unbelievable. And as the result, there's an hostility towards anything Republican, anything traditional. And it is a perfect place for the critical race theorists to get their foot in the door. So they'll fight this all they can, but we do want to bring it up. It's an opportunity to educate the rest of the country what should be done, how bad race theory is, alert parents and grandparents to pay attention to what your children are getting in school or even what they're getting in college. And this is the type of thing that in some places they are starting in elementary school. You know, I think it was the Jesuits said, if you have somebody who's 7 years old, you've got them for the rest of their life. And that's what they're aiming for. Teach children to dislike their country at a very young age.
And to see everything through the lens of race, which is so sad to me. Congressman, I was hearing Senator Tom Cotton when he was questioning General Mark Milley, and he was reading these whistleblower complaints. And he was reading to General Milley this complaint of this one African-American servicewoman in the Navy, and she was, you know, had accomplished quite a bit. She was he didn't give exactly what she did, but she was a very highly trained specialist. And she was objecting to critical race theory because she said it's telling everyone to not see me as what I've accomplished and my skill set, but just as a black woman in the Navy. And Tom Cotton was sharing that in different instances, and it was almost like it went in one ear and out the other with General Milley. He just wasn't hearing it. That's not military readiness.
Well, he's brainwashed, right? He's been made part of the cult, which is a shame when you see somebody who's got such an important position. But that's the only way you can describe it, right? Brainwashed. Everything is race all the time. When I talk to somebody, when I look at them, I say, oh, you're Hispanic or you're Asian or whatever, and I don't view you as an individual, which of course is the exact definition of racism, right? They view everybody solely by where their ancestors came from, and it's a shame. It kind of scares me about the military, that this guy advanced so far. I mean, I think they should have, you know, kind of cut him off at private there. I don't know he got such an important rank. So utterly lacking.
I don't know either.
Right.
It is scary because that stuff that doesn't scare China and it doesn't scare Russia. I was reading a story just the other day about Russia conducting some war exercises about 35 miles out to sea away from Hawaii, and then of course reading another story about on the Black Sea, Russia was getting a little bit sassy, so to speak, with British ships. They're not focused on pronouns and anything else. They're focused on aggression and readiness, whereas I don't know what we're doing. I hope there's some effort I see there is in the Senate to kind of nail this down.
Well, it's a scary thing as far as our military is concerned because our government looks so weak, and you never want to present a picture of weakness. You look at what's being said at the United Nations, for example. Does this sound like a country of proud individuals willing to fight for freedom? Or does it sound like a country that is ready for civil war? And to me, if I'm the Russians or I'm the Chinese, I look at this weak critical race theory, as well as the kind of inability to manage things at the border. It looks like our government is completely weak and losing control.
Yeah, we got to put an end to this. It looks like there's a lot of bipartisan effort to stop it, at least in the citizenry, if not in D.C. Congressman Grothman, pleasure to have you. We'd love to talk with you again. We appreciate all you do and glad that you're standing up against this Marxism in education. Thank you.
Thank you much.
Of course. All right, folks, apparently actor Michael B. Jordan, well, he has apparently committed an egregious sin of cultural appropriation, because no one can tell the difference between appreciation and appropriation, apparently. Well, he named his new rum, and now he's had to change the name of it. We'll tell you about it when we come back. Well, as you know, everything, and I really mean everything, offends everybody today. Everybody's offended always. Add actor Michael B. Jordan to that list. Now, his crime, cultural appropriation. That's right, he appreciated Trinidad culture by naming his GOV'T rum after the Caribbean Carnival Festival. And this is what Michael B. Jordan thought his rum was all about, according to the boxes it comes in. Quote, derived from the Antillean Creole French term meaning daybreak, GOV'T originated in the pre-dawn streets of Trinidad as celebrations of emancipation combined with carnival season to serve as the festival's informal commencements. Crafted on those same islands, GOV'T rum is a tribute to the party start. End quote. Okay, that sounds fun. I mean, I like rum. Sounds innocent enough. So here's some of the images from the GOV'T Festival. It's a little bit like Burning Man. There's some devils in there. My Baptist granny'd be rolling in her grave. But in any case, Michael B. Jordan is now being accused of cultural appropriation, because nobody understands the difference between appropriation and appreciation. You know, it's a favorite accusation that super far sensitive people on the left love to throw around today to keep every last culture in their lane. I mean, heaven forbid one culture celebrate another culture's food or style or festival. I mean, I guess that's so terrible. We used to call it, again, cultural appreciation. Like when your football team wanted to be called the Chiefs because American Indians are noble and fierce. And when you make rum named after GOV'T, presumably you want to pay homage to like a really awesome party, a festival in the Caribbean. And by the way, doesn't the GOV'T Festival only get more famous if there's a rum named after it by a guy who's an actor? And that just makes way too much sense. And we live in this age of hypersensitivity. So that means Michael B. Jordan needs a good lecture about his cultural appropriation from none other than Nicki Minaj. Nicki said this, quote, I'm sure MBJ didn't intentionally do anything that he thought Caribbean people would find offensive, she writes. But now that you are aware, change the name and continue to flourish and prosper, end quote. Okay, I have to just say, like, does nobody have like a phone? You can't message a dude. You can't direct message a dude. Like everybody always has to have these slap fights publicly. Everybody's got to flex to show like how much of a bouncer they are. Good night. Now, speaking of cultural appropriation, I have seen Nicki Minaj wear wigs. Where she looks like a blonde woman from Switzerland. She even calls herself Barbie on Instagram. Is she culturally appropriating her look? Just change the wig and continue to flourish and prosper, right? So there it is. So this guy, this actor, Michael B. Jordan, according to the bouncer of all things cultural, Nicki Minaj, you have to have permission to move forward and flourish after you change the name of your rum. Okay, then go ahead and change your blonde wig. And also, you can't use pasteurized milk or get the rabies vaccine unless you're French, apparently. I mean, are we going to really do that? We're going to stay in our own lanes? Because I'm sure that Michael B. Jordan didn't mean to culturally appropriate. And look, it only cost you a few $1 million to change every last ad, bottle, and piece of intellectual property that he's already stamped with the GOV'T brand in order to appease, I don't know, maybe Nicki Minaj and everybody else, all the other anguished souls out there. So in the end, what did Michael B. Jordan do when confronted with his cultural appropriation that we used to call cultural appreciation? He did what everybody in Hollywood does. He apologized profusely. He said, quote, I just want to say on behalf of myself and my partners, our intention was never to offend or hurt a culture that we love and respect, and we hope to celebrate and shine a positive light on. Last few days has been a lot of listening, a lot of learning and engaging in countless community conversations. We hear you, I hear you, want to be clear that we are in the process of renaming, end quote. So if you ran this through like the filter of the common parlance of our times, it would be, please, please don't cancel me. I love actually being able to eat and have a career too much to be able to tell you to pound sand, as I should, over this stupid charge of cultural appropriation. So I will change the name and beg profusely for forgiveness, because this is the brave new hypersensitive world that we live in. I mean, it's crazy. Sheldon Whitehouse can be a member of 3 whites-only clubs, and that's okay. But oh my gosh, Michael B. Jordan names his rum after Joubert, and all hell breaks loose. And his new rum, I'm sure it'll be named something else. Plans on thriving. And look, no matter how much pandering and apologizing it takes, sometimes, good heavens, this is just mind-blowing. Rum's supposed to be fun, right? It's what pirates drank. Same, Pirates of the Caribbean. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.